Now we're going to learn about the circuits of emotion and motivation. That we have Panksepp, who was a very dear neuroscientist from the 20th century who died maybe 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, at a very young age, 67 or something. It was a shame to lose him so early. He discovered that all mammals share the same circuits and that we share the same circuits with mammals. So he discovered that, that rats laugh when you tickle them, that the same area of their brain is lighting up that lights up when humans are tickled and laugh. It lights up in rats when they're tickled. And that rats will come around, and again, if you have a tickling hand that stays in one place, the rat will come over and let themselves be tickled and laugh, and then go away for a little bit and come back and be tickled and laugh. So it's a pleasure thing. And that dogs are laughing when they're playing and they're panting. When dogs start to pant, they're laughing. So our dogs, when we start to play with them and they're panting, are actually laughing, which I love. So the rats actually make a sound which is above the level of our hearing when they are laughing. And baby mice, I was at a conference about mothering and nurturing, and one of the researchers brought the sound of baby mice calling for their mother. It sounded like birdsong when we brought it down to human hearing. Sounded like birdsong. So Panksepp and his discoveries actually cast an interesting light on the animal research that was done throughout the 20th century. Because what he was discovering was that animals were affected by relationship, and that even lab animals are affected by relationship. That the results of an experiment will turn out differently if a research assistant is kind to the rats as opposed to uncaring and unfeeling with the rats. So Panksepp was very bewildered that his work was not well received by the biological community, but until the advent of interpersonal neurobiology and the discovery of the importance of his work in terms of relational neuroscience, he was almost ignored entirely by the scientific establishment. And part of the reason for that was that his work cast doubt on thousands of pieces of research, but part of that work was also that he was conclusively letting us understand that the idea in the 20th century that animals feel no pain was completely crap. So no wonder he was excluded by the scientific community, but I believe that was why he died so young. When he would speak once he became well known and started to speak at conferences, you would hear the pain of exclusion in his speeches when he spoke. And I think that's why we lost him, and I have a great grief that he was lost.
Sarah, would you say his name?
Yes, I'll write it up. It's Panksepp is his last name. He was Estonian of origin. I think he was born in North America, but he had Jakk Panksepp was his name. He wrote 2 beautiful, complex books one of which is called The Archaeology of Emotion. And so what he discovered was that there were these 7 circuits, and all of the emotions that we have fall within these 7 circuits. Except disgust. Disgust, I'll just write down here, actually is an important emotion to be able to name because it comes up so much when we're working with healing trauma. But it actually doesn't reach the amygdala. It stops in the brainstem, and it deeply affects our bodies. When we have an experience of disgust, our skin, our body temperature rises by 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a body level response to contagion or contamination. So we have a visceral biological response to disgust, but it's not included in these circuits because he was working at the level of the limbic system. And disgust doesn't get that high up, if that makes sense. So it's an important emotion. and it's not on this list because it doesn't get up as high as the amygdala. So all of these circuits actually include the brainstem and the amygdala, and then go in different areas from there. So this word circuit is literal. Like literally, this is the way that emotions travel. They travel through different parts of the amygdala to different parts of the brain, different parts of the brainstem. So part of what's happening when I say we need to receive the messages that our bodies are sending us, part of what's happening is we're saying to our bodies, yes, my verbal understanding of you is that you are working on this circuit. Yes, I understand that this is the panicked aloneness circuit. I put sorrow, shame here. This is the panic grief circuit, loneliness. So 7, seeking, which is actually the entire left hemisphere. The seeking circuit runs on dopamine. The seeking circuit is our doing. So we have our being and we have our doing, and our being is like the right hemisphere relational space, and the doing is the left hemisphere. And Stephen Porges, who you will remember from our nervous system, vagus nerve study, Stephen Porges says that whenever we move into the dopamine-driven left hemisphere, we're moving into sympathetic activation. So the experience of getting our bodies engaged and our minds engaged in doing, he says, is always sympathetic activation. Which is interesting because I said that all of these circuits show up in social engagement, and I do have a question mark about seeking and social engagement. You find me balanced on what researchers say rather than any research I have been able to find that helps me understand the actual nuts and bolts of this. So you can hold this as a question as I do. Certainly everything else will show up in social engagement. Will seeking show up in social engagement, or will it automatically put us into sympathetic activation? I don't know. Stephen Porges says yes, it automatically puts us into sympathetic activation. That as soon as we want someone to do something, as soon as we are in action, we are out of relationality.
Does it come in with a level of stress?
Yes, I think so.
So every time I do my spreadsheet, I'm in a level of stress. Is that what I'm saying?
Well, see, this is the interesting thing.
Yeah.
Can it be that this, I think we can have dopamine here without cortisol, right? But then, is it still sympathetic activation? This is my question. Yeah.
Because what's the distinction between doing and not doing? Otherwise, we would be in social engagement and then we do something and we drop out.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah. That as soon.
Is it really still to be in social engagement?
You can be playing. You can be touching. You can be in sex. You can be in sexuality.
Doing my spreadsheet and be in relationship.
That is the implication. Yes.
Unless this is what Marshall is on about and says about everything we do needs to be
With the joy, a child.
You know, if the spreadsheets bring you joy.
And then that other question is, if the spreadsheet's bringing you joy or satisfaction, which it very well may. I mean, there's a satisfaction. He said the joy of a child feeding hungry ducks. Joy is in the play circuit. Pleasure and satisfaction are in the seeking circuit. You can have shrieking delight and satisfaction that has no relationality in it whatsoever. So we could be like a pig in delightful pig rolling heaven with our spreadsheets, but can we see that other people exist? Or is it the delight of hyperfocus?
Yeah.
So are you seeing where I'm caught a little bit? Yes, Joe?
So I have the question, can you be in numerous circuits at once?
Yes, yeah, it seems that you can, because we are complex. So we can be in the care circuit is the nurturing circuit. So it's the circuit for mammals that comes alive when the nurturing parent is taking care of the children. That's the clearest expression of the care circuit. So in humans, it would be when nurturing parents were taking care of human babies or animal babies or whoever, but that's the care circuit. And then often we're mixing care with seeking. And it can be such an interesting mix. I mean, we can think of our mothers. To what extent were our mothers in their seeking circuits with us? And to what extent were they doing? And to what extent were they being? Right? So that's the mix. And if there's a little bit more care than seeking, again, remember yesterday we were talking about how sweet it was when the right hemisphere has the predominance. Again, it's sweet if we're in relationships where care is a little bit higher than seeking, rather than seeking being a little higher than care, which is where many of us have experienced receiving care, and that's when care is intrusive, is when it's accompanied with a lot of seeking, because then there's not much listening, because then the mother is in activation rather than in engagement. Right? It's just starting to make sense that we're putting it all together. Yes, Vajra Sarah.
I'm just musing here, but I'm just thinking of really good teamwork. When you're really responsive to other, caring of other, but you're definitely getting things done.
Yeah, yeah.
Might
So
that
would be, yeah, also an integration of care and seeking. Also possibly play.
But it might not be left brain.
As Joe was saying, can these circuits be intertwined? The answer is yes, we are complex. Yeah. So again, in a team, it's sweet if there's a lot of seeking, but it's sort of sweeter if the care has the upper hand, or the play. Care and play have an upper hand. And then it can be deeply enjoyable. So seeking, and then we can also see these circuits entangled by trauma. And this is one of the things that we see when we're talking about the early experience. Do you remember we were talking about how I would cry but try to smile at the same time? This is an entanglement of my panic grief circuit and my play circuit. Like my mother wanted happiness. So my mother wanted happiness, but my grief would come through, but I would try to do happiness for her. So there's an entanglement. So every time that I start to cry, I can feel that rippling in my mouth. It's an entanglement of the two circuits where they're joined and they go together instead of being able to freely. This is what healing does for us. Healing takes and disentangles the circuits so that they all get to complexly intermix in response to life itself. Seeking, panic, care, fear, terror, fear for the life, rage, all of the anger. And what's really interesting when we start to work with these circuits is that we begin to understand and differentiate between our rage circuit and our seeking circuit. Why is this important? This is important because one of the manifestations of the seeking circuit is what's called predatory aggression. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that runs the left hemisphere, and it is a pleasure chemical for humans. When people take crystal methamphetamines, it makes a 14-fold increase in the flow of dopamine in the brain, in the left hemisphere. It's a euphoria experience. An abundance of dopamine is euphoria. So predatory aggression also makes dopamine flow. So here's where cruelty and hunting, different kinds of hunting behaviors, can be immensely pleasurable and can cause immense havoc in human society. And it's very different from rage. Animals will repeat predatory aggression but they will not willingly and voluntarily repeat circumstances that take them to rage. Rage is a burst of cortisol and adrenaline that is not pleasant for humans, where predatory aggression, with its flow of dopamine, can give people pleasure.
So just back to psychopaths and serial killers, is there lack of empathy and then seeking dopamine, that combo?
Yeah. Yeah, and we see it. This explains, you don't have this so much here, but in the US we have the mass shooters. And then they arrest the mass shooters, and there's this peculiar, absolute lack of comprehension that they've done anything. There appears to be no regret ever for any mass shooter ever. And I was like, what is going on? What is the emotion? How can they have no emotion? And then I began to understand it's predatory aggression. It's almost like the right hemisphere has gone so far offline that there is no feedback about morality. So the feedback about morality is a right hemisphere phenomenon. Takes us also, Sophie, to in-group, out-group questions, because morality is less about any kind of absolute values, but rather it comes back to the group norms question that we were working with before lunch. Very much about group norms. Our loyalty and our sense of conscience is linked to our in-group, which is why when you work in prison, you'll often find that a part of the healing process for folks who are trying to move into pro-social living is that they have to make a break with the loyalty to their families and their communities that are involved in criminal activities, because that's what's right. If they start doing a 9-to-5 job, they're breaking the law of their community, and their conscience feels wrong because their conscience links them to their community. So part of this incredible stickiness of in-group, out-group is the neurochemical oxytocin, the bonding hormone. So then Andy and I were speaking at lunch about how do we facilitate in ways that do less of the creation of in-group, out-group experiences. And having some awareness of this can help us. Yes, Betsy?
I've been fortunate enough to work in schools a lot of my working life, 47 years with small children, off and on. And as I say, I was fortunate enough to be in a position that I could sneak systemic work in and work with very small children on belonging and the in-group, out-group, and how to help them facilitate each other, accept each other with their differences. And I truly feel unless we can do that with small ones, this isn't going to change, because human nature just thrives on the in-group, out-group.
It does, it's so true.
Much, and yet belonging is our basic bottom line of everything.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to teach this in schools, but it's hard work getting it in. Nobody wants to listen.
Yeah. Thank you for doing the work.
Well, it's very tiny.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And adrenaline. Yeah. And it's not something that any mammals find pleasurable. Nobody tries to repeat the circumstances that take us into rage, which is hugely important for understanding domestic violence. Because we so often think that people who are in domestic violence situations have anger issues, but they don't actually have rage issues, they actually have predatory aggression issues.
So some kind of sort of bullying in inverted commas.
Yes, yeah. And when I don't know if any of you have seen cats, your cats or neighbors' cats, when they're hunting, right? But they become very focused and their eyes become dilated, and there's this sort of, enjoyment in the stalking and pouncing. It's sort of, in a way, it's easier to see because we do less hunting in our modern day society. I mean, it's obviously something, the hunting instinct was something that led to survival for hunters and gatherers, right? But it's something that we do less, although I grew up in Alaska and there was a lot of hunting in Alaska.
And it makes me think about the people who do actively hunt in this country.
Oh.
What we were talking about, the dysfunction of the relationships often between wealthy people and their kids,
Oh.
and boarding school,
Oh.
and then those being often the people where hunting is part of the...
Interesting.
Very
interesting.
Else, lots of other people's morality goes, what are you doing?
Mm.
There's no sense that there's anything wrong with it.
Very interesting. Having grown up in Alaska where it was subsistence hunting, I don't have I'm like, oh, hunting, okay. What were you going to say, Sophie?
So I just wanted to ask about, so there's the dopamine and cortisol going on in the left hemisphere, and there's adrenaline going on in the right. Where does oxytocin come into it?
Where does
Oxytocin come
oxytocin? Well, the care circuit is entirely the right hemisphere. And that's where oxytocin is on that care circuit, and also in the sexuality circuit. And of course, our most wonderful experiences of sexuality are often sexuality mixed with care and play. I mean, that's just a wonderful trio for sexuality. But we can also have sexual trauma that links sexuality with fear, that links sexuality with rage, that links sexuality with seeking. So sexual addictions of all kinds have a linking of the sexual circuit and the seeking circuit. And of course, if we're working with experiences of sexual assault, then there's a linking of predatory aggression and sexuality. And there's these traumatic links that are very important to talk about. I don't know if anyone here does work in prison. I do work in prison. But it's important to be able to understand that there can be traumatic links between predatory aggression and rage that help people who are in prison for violent sexual assault to begin to see and disentangle and differentiate and move towards some sort of a self-understanding that can support healing. So it's so important I find the circuits becoming more and more important to me the longer that I'm working. And then of course there's our play circuit, which is something that we see almost as rarely in a pure form as we see social engagement. And they're very much connected. And mostly what we see is play mixed with seeking, right? Because there's competitive sports are all play mixed with seeking, with more seeking in them than play. And then the performing arts, often there's play, but there's also seeking of certain kinds.